I want to send a big shout out to my friends across the pond in the UK for deciding to leave the European Union. Now, this happened on Thursday, June 23rd, 2016, in the referendum vote where about 75% of the nation actually turned out, and the votes to actually leave outnumbered the votes to stay by a margin of about 1,250,000. So it's about a 52 to 48% swing. So it was a pretty wide margin. Even though it seems kind of close on paper, it was pretty wide, especially since this actually was not projected to go this way. Many so-called experts thought that it would go the opposite way. They thought that the UK would remain in the EU. Now, this has a lot of global implications, but it also has regional implications, but I'll get to that a little bit later. I just want to talk about the first reaction and also the reason why the UK has left the EU from my point of view and from what people that are in the UK have told me. The main reason why the UK left the EU is because of the immigration crisis, right? The migration crisis. You have hordes of third world people coming into the country creating problems. And people hear that and they want to think racist, you know, liberals, that is. They want to think, oh, you're being a racist, you're a xenophobe. It's like, no. It's not about being racist. It's not about being xenophobic. It's not about being bigoted towards religion. Because if you come from a place that is productive and you're a productive person yourself, there's not going to be a problem. You can be a Buddhist, an atheist, a Satanist, a Christian, a Hindu, whatever it is. You can come and you're fine. But the problem is with the Islamic people that come over and start problems. The terrorism, taking advantage of children, the rape gangs, stuff like that is the serious problem. And the reason why it's tied to being in the EU is because of what the EU does as far as its borders. When you're in the EU, many have told me that if you're in the UK, it means like your border is not really important. Luckily for the UK and Ireland, they are not in the Schengen zone. They were able to opt out. But unfortunately, when all of the rest of Europe is in the Schengen zone, that allows these Muslims that come from faraway places in the Middle East to come right to the doorstep, right in Calais in France, etc., which is a direct impact on the UK. And it's hard for them to be able to combat that, especially by being in the European Union when they have so many regulations on top of them. Now, there are some states, I think there's at least Switzerland, who is in the Schengen zone, but is not in the EU and exists within Europe. But I think all the other European Union states must be in the Schengen zone. And the Schengen zone basically means that there are no borders between each of the countries in the European Union as far as it relates to travel. So if you're just a happy, lucky, air quotes, immigrant coming from Syria or Afghanistan or some stand somewhere in the Middle East, and you happen to make it to Turkey, and then you mosey your way on into Greece, and then you find a way to get into another European place. You go to Austria, you go to wherever, they can't really prevent you, or they're not supposed to be able to prevent you from being able to move wherever you want to go. You're supposed to be able to go on a bus and do whatever you want to do, go wherever you want to go. That is kind of what the European Union says. Now, there are a lot of protests against this. You know, in a place like South Tyrol, which is in northern Italy, and it's to the south of Austria, which used to be part of Austria during the Austro-Hungarian Empire. But in South Tyrol, they're building borders basically between Italy and Austria to prevent these hordes of people from coming through and making their way into Austria and then on into Germany. And the reason why they're trying to go into Germany is because Angela Merkel has invited them. Basically, she says that she wants 800,000 new refugees per year coming from these third world hellholes, right? So, of course, there's going to be a giant magnet, and they're going to try to get in there any way they can. On their foot, on a bus, plane, car, being smuggled, whatever it is, they're going to try to get in there. That's their whole purpose. So they're trying to build borders to prevent that. They're trying to build walls and barriers to prevent that. Now, that may actually go against the Schengen zone's regulations as part of being in the EU, which I would assume automatically means you're part of the Schengen zone, even though you're able to sign up voluntarily to be in the Schengen zone like Switzerland. But I'm not really sure how many air quotes refugees and migrants Switzerland actually has within its borders. Same thing with a place like the Vatican and Italy, etc. I saw something where the Pope brought in like 13 people to the Vatican, you know, just for show, just to say that he actually did something, even though the countries that are around him outside of those walls, which have been up since the year 800 to prevent Muslim invasion, even though those countries are suffering at the hands of the Muslim invasion, he could feel good about himself And the church can feel good as well by allowing like 13 people in there. But I digress. My point is that countries are being overrun with Islamic influence. Not only the terrorism, but just the cultural differences. You got people wearing hijabs and niqabs, which is an obvious security risk because when somebody goes into a public place, you have no idea if they are wearing a suicide bomb. You don't know if they're coming in there with a large weapon. You have no idea what's going on. It is antithetical to Western culture, the way that people from the Islamic world come into the country and behave. Now, it'd be different if they came into the Western world behaving like the Western world. Just like the old saying goes, when in Rome, do as the Romans. But that is not what's happening. And a big part of that is the EU, which by many accounts is dominated by Germany. That's why some people like to call it the Fourth Reich, right? Because it's like after the war and the so-called Third Reich was defeated, did it really go away? Did the German center of influence really go away? Like I said in previous videos, Germany is a geographical center of Europe as we know it. Even though Russia technically is in Europe, but not really. Russia is kind of like in Asia. But if you talking about Moscow, if you're talking about the Kaliningrad Oblast, that's obviously in Europe geographically. My point is that Germany is a cultural center and a geographical center of what we know of as Europe. So a lot of things go on there, and they also have a large population, and they also have countries that surround them that kind of have the same language, like Austria. That's a German-speaking country. I think Luxembourg, Switzerland, places like that, they speak German as well. South Tyrol, I'm pretty sure they speak German, which is in northern Italy. So they have a large influence culturally, geographically, and just by the sheer numbers that they have as far as Germanic peoples and people that speak German. So when you have somebody like Angela Merkel, who is in charge of the geographical center and the cultural center, and by some accounts, the power center of Europe, saying, hey, 800,000 people come on over here to Germany and we'll just board you up. We'll do whatever you want. That's going to put pressure on the surrounding countries that surround Germany literally, and also in the EU, to also accept people like that. And a lot of people don't want that in their country. And that's very simple. That's what we have seen in the EU exit vote from Britain. And the voter breakdown was pretty interesting. I was talking to a guy on Twitter, and he said that the white working class areas are pretty much 60-40 as far as it relates to exit versus stay. And the more air quotes urban immigrant heavy areas, you know, most of London, they are pretty much the opposite. And I think London, they had like a 70-30 stay versus leave tally. So that pretty much gives you an idea of who wants to stay and who wants to leave and why. People that want to stay in the EU probably just want to be able to invite their family members. They want to be able to live in a place where the borders are pretty much open and porous. It's similar to people that are Mexican American that have just become U.S. citizens, and also people that are illegal that came from Mexico, and or those that just came from the southern border that are not Mexican but came from other parts of the world. They're going to want to vote for a Democrat person, somebody that will allow open borders and amnesty, because they want to be able to allow their cousins and their family members, their grandmas, etc., to come on over and join them. And they also want to be emotionally tied to people that will allow people like them, even if they are not related and even if they don't know each other, to come on over. This is why I'm interested in the whole Brexit thing, because a lot of parallels exist between what happened with Brexit and what's going on right now in the U.S. I mean, look at the people in charge. You actually had David Cameron, who was a guy that was leading the Remain campaign. He actually resigned. You know, he's a prime minister of the UK. Now, he won't resign immediately. He'll be on his post until October. And then at that point, he says that there will be a new prime minister. And many people have speculated that it will be Mr. Boris Johnson, who was a former mayor of London and was the leader of the Exit campaign. And many have compared Boris Johnson to Donald Trump because of how they look. I mean, if you look at their face, they kind of got similar facial features, like the way they parse their lips, and then also the hair, the wild blonde hair. They both kind of had that same thing going on. And they also have similar body types. And they also kind of both say things that are a little off the rails. Some may describe Mr. Boris Johnson as a liberal, just as some may describe Trump as a liberal. Like a New York City liberal, maybe Boris Johnson is the equivalent of that in the UK. But I don't know. I'm just saying that people are kind of comparing them. People are scared because they're like, oh, we're going to get Donald Trump as a president of the United States and we're going to get Boris Johnson as a prime minister of the UK. But it's like, look, these two individuals came to be because of the situation that's going on right now in their respective countries. I mean, if it was not for the en masse Muslim invasion to the UK, and if it was not for the en masse invasion of people from the southern border coming into the US, and also the threat of terrorism every day, maybe a guy like David Cameron could persist. See, liberalism is all good until reality strikes, until tragedy happens, until liberalism is not tolerated. It's just like when you live in a neighborhood that is safe and you don't have to lock your door, and you just keep leaving your door open because you feel like you live in a safe neighborhood and nothing will happen. But then what happens when you allow people to come into your neighborhood that will break in your house? You can't keep leaving your door open. It's just that simple. You got to do one or two things. Either you got to tighten your security up at your house, or you got to kick the people out that you let come in that will run into your house, or a combination of both, right? Kick the individuals out that you brought in that are causing the problems, and also tighten your security up, because you don't know if they're going to come back in through the back door, if they're going to sneak in, if they're going to run in, whatever it is, because now the can of worms is open, and it's kind of hard to put the lid back on top of that, because now the cat's out the bag. But I digress from that point. Now, people are being scared about what's happening with the stock market. They said the stock market has plummeted, you know, all around the world. They said they halted trading in Japan. I think the Dow Jones fell by 600 points, and they were all dramatic on the nightly news. I saw Lester Holt talking about, oh, the Dow has lost all of its gains from the year. Look, and the reality is the stock market does not have that much to do with the average citizen. A lot of that is just people on Wall Street speculating, people that are shareholders just being scared or just reacting, people at their computer just doing stuff, companies doing stuff. It does not have that much bearing on the average individual. People are kind of upset and they're scared about what's going on in the EU and the UK. So they're being funny about their investments, they're withdrawing, they're selling off or whatever. But here's the thing about that. There's still Article 50 of the Treaty of Lisbon. That is what has to be invoked by the Prime Minister of the UK, which probably will not be David Cameron. He'll probably allow that to go to Boris Johnson in October if Boris Johnson becomes the prime minister, and then he will have to invoke it. And then at that point, they will have 2 years to negotiate the terms of their exit. Now, I'm not really sure what the negotiation will entail. Will it be any kind of cash settlement? Whatever the case is, they got 2 years to do it. And then at the end of the 2 years, if the European Union and its other members of the bloc are not successful in being able to keep the UK, then the UK leaves. Now, I've heard somewhere that the other countries can veto some of the actions, so they could theoretically keep the UK in the EU and not allow them to leave. I'm not really sure how true or false that is. If you know anything about that, let me know in the comments below. But from my point of view, I doubt that would happen, even if it could happen, because there have been other countries that have been rumored to demand their own referendums to become independent of the EU. That includes France, Italy, and the Netherlands. These are pretty big power places, especially France, right? And if Italy leaves, that's going to be very interesting because, like I said before, you had the whole Austro-Hungarian Empire. If Italy leaves, what happens in South Tyrol? Because that's still kind of connected to Austria and Germany. So this whole thing could trigger a domino effect, similar to what happened in 1990 when you had Lithuania leave the Soviet Union. And then shortly thereafter, you had other nations copy them, and then the Union collapsed. But that was not the main reason why the Soviets collapsed. The main reason why was because of underneath the surface issues. You had the whole thing with the Chernobyl accident in Ukraine, and then they tried to cover it up. The Soviets did, right? And then there was a whole big health crisis that came about as a result. And then you had the whole thing about the Afghan situation. And then you had the whole thing with many different ethnic tensions in different countries that existed within the Soviet Union. That all led to the collapse. And it could be the same thing going on here with UK leading the way with their secession from the EU. And the biggest problem that we see in the EU is the en masse Muslim migration headed up by Angela Merkel. So that's going to be very interesting, especially since Germany, like I said before, is a center geographically and culturally of Europe. And they are kind of like the big dog, especially now that UK is gone. They are the big dog in the EU. But I don't have too much more to say about it. Again, I say congrats to the UK. You did it. You know, I was kind of surprised that they were able to do it. I thought there would be a lot of funny business going on. I thought it would be a lot of chicanery. I thought it would be a lot of fraud. I saw Paul Joseph Watson live tweeting and being on Facebook talking about it. And he had a picture of this woman that was campaigning actively outside of a polling place, which is illegal, right next to a young lady, or I'm not sure what that person is, in some kind of face mask, like the Islamic stuff. I'm like, man, it don't look too good, you know, but you were able to pull it out. So I'm proud of you. So that's all I got. I mean, what is your opinion about it? Do you think they should have stayed? Now, if you think they should have stayed, what would be the reason why they should stay? Do you think they were right to leave? And if so, why? What was the main thing that put you over the edge to agree with them leaving? Was it the whole thing about the Islamic terrorism? Is it the whole thing about the cultural differences between Muslims and native Brits and other immigrants that are not Muslims? Was it the whole thing about the rape gangs that are going across the country of UK and the rest of Europe? Whatever your comments are, let me know in the comments below. And that's all I got to say for this video. If you like what you heard, please comment, rate, share, and subscribe. Peace.
British people have made a very clear decision to take a different path. And as such, I think the country requires fresh leadership to take it in this direction. I will do everything I can as Prime Minister to steady the ship over the coming weeks and months. But I do not think it would be right for me to try to be the captain that steers our country to its next destination.